I'm Bill Thomas. I'm the publisher of Doubleday, and I'd like to join my colleagues in welcoming you to the breakfast and thanking you for everything that you do. 3 times a week, millions of men and women pick up the Wall Street Journal and turn first to Jason Gay's column. It's a sports column, but its popularity stems from the fact that it's unlike any other sports column around. For one thing, Jason doesn't take the sports world or himself too seriously. Second, it's funny, a quality not known in the Wall Street Journal heretofore, unless you count the opinion page. Sorry, Rupert, he's not listening. Third, while his ostensible subject is sports, the column is sneakily about everyday life and how we deal with it. It's been described as a sports column for people who don't normally read sports columns. And in a similar vein, his first book, Little Victories, is an advice book for people who wouldn't necessarily pick up an advice book. Jason got the idea for the book after his column, Rules for the Thanksgiving Touch Football Game, provoked a huge response among readers. It got him into thinking about other life situations in which rules would come in handy. The office Christmas party, bragging about your children without alienating all your friends, taking a plane trip without strangling the guy who stuffs the overhead luggage bin, etc. Out of these ruminations came Little Victories. This is a very funny book, but as I said, Jason is sneaky. And as he weaves in his own stories about fatherhood, illness, getting fired, the death of a loved one, the reader begins to realize it's also a poignant and wise book about life. To underscore my point, just this past week we sent the manuscript out for blurbs, and already the following 2 people weighed in. Elizabeth Gilbert, author of Eat, Pray, Love, wrote, "I loved this book. Little Victories is funny, wise, direct, deceptively straightforward, and incredibly moving. As soon as I finished reading it, I put it in the mail to my father, along with a reminder of my love. Such reminders, after all, are what we are here for, as this story reminds us." And Gretchen Rubin, author of The Happiness Project, said, "Little Victories manages to be hilarious, helpful, and profound in one unpredictable mix. It made me happy." Please welcome my friend, Jason Gay.
Thanks very much for having me here this morning and this incredible panel who are all wonderful. This book is, in fact, Little Victories, as you can see right here. It slips right in the pocket. The sequel will be Mini Victories, followed by Tiny Victories. I am a sports writer. Came to it a little unnaturally, and I wanted to talk a little bit about how I got into it and what a library's relationship was to my evolution into a sports writer. I grew up with a father who was relatively strict, and when we got the Boston Globe delivered to our house, for a couple years it was delivered by me because I was the neighborhood paper boy, my father, the first thing he would do was pull the sports section out of the Boston Globe and put it on top of the refrigerator, whereupon I was not allowed to read it. It was not the serious part of the newspaper. It was not, in fact, news. It was not something you were supposed to consume first thing in the morning. In the grand tradition of you becoming whatever your parents tell you cannot do, I immediately became obsessed with sports. And so my refuge was the library at the Winbrook School, the school where my mother taught, where I read such great classics as the Pete Rose story, the Hank Aaron story, the Willie Mays story, and then some real classics, which in fact were recommended by librarians, including The Summer Game, 5 Seasons, Education of a Tennis Player, and also an under-recognized classic called The Short Season, which is the true real-life inside story of the 1979 Boston Celtics, the worst team in Boston Celtics history, written by John Powers. Sold about 4 copies. But a phenomenal moment for me to have that kind of exposure to reading. And as I got older, I went to the University of Wisconsin. They had a 24-hour library, which is a strange environment, the Helen C. White Library. And instead of studying, instead of cramming for exams, I found myself rafting through the old sort of rollers with all the newspapers from around the country. And that's where I got exposed to people like Jim Murray, Dave Anderson, Dan Jenkins, Sally Jenkins, Mitch Albom, Frank DeFord. This really formed the crux of my exposure to sports and why I wanted to do what I wound up doing. As Bill said, Little Victories is not a sports book. It's not really an advice book. It's sort of a mixture of a lot of different things. And it came about originally as this sort of rule book, this sort of guide to living. And then something very serious happened in my life. My father was diagnosed with a terminal illness. And that forms the through line. This was my mentor. This was my guide. This was the guy who basically banned me from being a sports writer. The person who was the sort of most influential character in my life. And it just was added a seriousness to the book. I wouldn't say, because I still believe fundamentally it's a humor book, but I feel it definitely gives it a little bit of weight. I've been in the midst of fact-checking this book, which has been an interesting experience to fact-check your own sort of personal memoirs. I hired somebody on the outside who came back, this guy, John, who I've worked with in the past, and he comes back with all these queries. And, fact-checking queries tend to be typically mundane. They're things like, okay, you were born in Boston, Massachusetts. Yes. You went to college at the University of Wisconsin. Yes. You like donuts? Yes. Your wife enjoys living with you. Today. You find satisfaction in every day? Should I be paying $175 for these questions? Did you enjoy writing this book? So these sort of existential questions throughout the fact-checking process. But I just want to quickly read a little passage from it to just give you a sense of the kind of thing that I'm talking about. And this is a chapter called Nobody's Cool, Especially Me. True story. I am many thousands of feet in the air flying in a private jet with one of the most famous entertainers on the planet. This is how it's supposed to be when you're flying in a jet with one of the most famous entertainers on the planet. It's supposed to be cool. It's supposed to be awesome. This flight is coming from the MTV Video Music Awards in Los Angeles, where the famous entertainer has won the prize of the night. This flight is going to be a party. Things are going to happen on this plane that aren't supposed to happen on planes, because the plane is ours, and if it's ours, anything goes, right? The famous entertainer provides all the necessary airplane carte blanche. I will take in every second of this moment at 30,000 feet and have a story I can tell for life, repeated ad nauseum until all my friends roll their eyes at each other when I begin telling it repeatedly. I will always be very, very coy about saying who this famous person is, out of some obnoxious sense of protection. I will never, ever say who in fact it is, because it is much cooler not to say. Okay, it's Rihanna. And this is what it's like to be on an airplane with Rihanna. It's not cool, not in the slightest. Everybody, including Rihanna, is asleep, except for me. I am pretty sure we are 30,000 feet in the air, but I am not sure what we are above. Maybe Colorado, maybe Idaho, maybe the Pyrenees. The cabin smells like Chinese food and stale pot. More than 2 people are snoring. The plane is a Gulfstream 4 or a 5 or a 3. I don't know what a Gulfstream is. I don't know anything about private jets. I drive a family wagon that reeks of spilled milk and graham crackers. I am up here because I have been promised an interview, and I am freaking out because this stupid interview has to happen before the plane lands for a scheduled refueling stop. Rihanna is supposed to talk before the plane went airborne, but then she changed her mind. Then she was supposed to take off and talk to me, and then she changed her mind. She ate Chinese food instead, and I sat there watching Rihanna eat Chinese food and play around on her iPhone. And I was thinking about all the questions she was not answering as she was eating Chinese food and playing around on her iPhone. Then Rihanna went to sleep. Rihanna's assistant came back to where I was sitting in the plane. There were only 8 or 9 of us on the jet, and she said she'll wake up Rihanna when we are an hour from landing, and we can do the interview then. That was 2 hours ago, and I am pretty sure I am beginning to feel the airplane descend. I look over, panicked, at Rihanna's assistant. She's also asleep. In this moment, I am the exact opposite of cool. I am sitting in the darkness, and I can feel the anxiety vapors lifting off the top of my head. My phone says it's close to 4 a.m., which is roughly the time of our scheduled refueling stop in Minot, North Dakota. I say our scheduled refueling stop, but I really mean their scheduled refueling stop, because as soon as we land, they're dumping me on the tarmac, and Rihanna and her gang will fly off to London, and I will hop on a Northwest flight to Minneapolis. And so I am panicking. I fear failure, and I have a job to do. I get up, my neck scrunched, and find Rihanna's assistant sleeping in her seat. She startles and whispers that she will do what she can. A short while, she comes back and says, Rihanna will see me now. I am making this like I'm sounding at the end of a long hallway. She is 8 feet in front of me. propped up on a bed. I walk over. Rihanna is lying back on pillows, expressionless. I lean over in the bed. I look like I'm going to read her a story. I look like I'm about to read Rihanna, Goodnight Moon. And it strikes me the ludicrousness of cool, how situational and contextual it is, how even the coolest moments are never as cool as they seem. Here I am, an active participant in the coolness industrial complex. This flight is going to be turned into a major magazine story, some true weapons-grade cool shit. And I am sweating and sleep-deprived in this wrinkly suit, and I feel like a Martian, out of it, insecure, in need of a juice box and a nap. Months from now, I will talk about this moment with some cool distance. Nothing solidifies the cool like the passage of time, and yet cool will never have been an accurate representation of the moment. Cool fled the scene. Anxiety was always the feeling. And maybe there's something to be said for being honest here and admitting that coolness is almost always a pose and seldom real. And no, I am not saying this in a way to make myself sound cool. Thank you.